Second part of the bill, now let me explain the mechanics of the amendment. In order to solve this problem with regard to this bill, this merely calls for a graduated increase each year. Fiscal year 2012, the net proceeds would equal at least 27.5%. In the fiscal year 2013, the net proceeds would equal 28.5%, et cetera, until it gets to 30%. That's just the national average now. The original statute says as close as practicable to 35%. Now, the important part of this is the last sentence. Notwithstanding the provisions of this paragraph, in any fiscal year prior to fiscal year 2016, if the net proceeds in a given fiscal year are less than the net proceeds in the previous fiscal year. In other words, if we in fact do hamstring the lottery somehow by requiring them to maximize the amount that's put into education, we'll stop. And we'll keep it at that level. So it is a circuit breaker that allows the lottery to step up, and if there is in fact a reduction, stop. We're not trying to micromanage, we're trying to maximize the amount that goes into the education fund. The other thing that this amendment does, lines 24, returns to the governor's original plan of providing commissions to the retailers of 5%. And that concludes my presentation, Mr. President, and if there's any questions, I would yield to those questions. Thank you so much.
There are questions. Thank you, Senator. Chair recognizes Senator from the 54th for a question.
Thank you, Mr. President. Will the gentleman yield?
Absolutely. My friend and Hope Scholar.
Thank you, Senator.
The very first Hope Scholar in the history of the Georgia Senate, in fact.
Thank you, Senator. As one who has formed a very favorable opinion of the gentleman in the well, I do have a couple of questions. You talked to Amendment number 5, and you talked about excess revenue. Isn't it true that the HOPE funds, as they are paid out, are generally done so in large quantities in a couple of times, in other words, when tuition is due?
Yes, that is true.
Isn't it also true that you build reserves for the purpose of being able to meet single large payments in the same way that you would if you made payroll or any other thing in a business?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Senator, further yield.
Yes, sir.
Senator, why wouldn't we grandfather in juniors in high school, sophomores in high school, freshmen in high school, kindergartners, second graders, like you and I share?
Sure. Mr. Senator, I believe under the plan you'll hear in a minute, we can save the Hope Scholarship for almost all of those children. And I do think that's what we should do. I think this amendment doesn't do that because at least if you're a junior in high school, you can have a year to plan. At least if you're a junior in high school, you can have a little bit of time instead of standing on the cusp of college and having the rug torn out from under you. I also don't know what the numbers are, frankly, with regard to juniors in high school, but I do know that standing here today, I'm confident we have the money in excess reserves, to be clear, to fund seniors and all of the current students. Now, to be clear, I say excess reserves. I understand your concern with regard to the 50% reserve that's there. And my assumption, although I have not seen the justification for this, my assumption is that that was calculated in order to deal with exactly what it is that you've described. We're not talking about spending down the necessary reserve that has been calculated. We're talking about spending the extra money that's just lying around.
Thank you, Senator. Senator, further yield?
Yes.
Senator, you're familiar with the term product mix?
Yes.
And I assume, Senator, in your business, in the legal profession, that you take some matters at a higher hourly rate and some at a lower hourly rate. Is that correct?
Well, they're all high, but yes, we...
I think that we have unanimity on that fact.
There are some rates that are relatively higher than the other high rates.
Would you agree that in the business of manufacturing, just in the business of services, in the business of the lottery, that product mix is a function of the marketplace you are serving?
Absolutely.
Would you further agree that professionals trained in such matters are generally more to be trusted than 56 great Georgians from across the state who have very little knowledge in the actual day-to-day implementation of a lottery service?
I do believe that, and that's why we've allowed them flexibility. My concern with regard to this amendment is that what you have now is a situation where we're maximizing revenues, and we're not looking at the net proceeds. So if what we need, this bill ties bonuses, for example, to the net proceeds, but left, like as I mentioned before, we have seen over history, this is not a business with a particular profit margin or something else. This is something that only provides a public benefit based on that bottom line. And that bottom line has been flat as the revenues have gone up. And as a policy matter, this body is responsible for determining, I think, what we want to maximize and allowing people to maximize the gambling revenues while doing nothing to increase the amount that goes into the net proceeds is a policy decision, not just a business decision.
Thank you, Senator. Will Senator further yield?
Absolutely.
Isn't it true that the state of Texas, when they took the step of increasing the mandatory percentage, saw not a flat line on the bottom line, but a plummet, and therefore after only a few short years instantly reversed themselves, only to wait 10 years before the net bottom line returned to where it was before they started mandating increase in percentage?
I have heard those numbers from Texas, and I have seen numbers from many other states, and all I can tell you is that our state ranks 29th out of 42 in the percentage that we pay into the lottery. We are below the national average, and that's it. And this amendment requires a small increase, and as soon as there's any drop-off in the revenues to the education fund, there's a circuit breaker. So we would never be in the situation that they ended up in Texas, and I know that you know from which you speak. So.